Hey everyone, tonight we're re-stepping away from dusty scrolls and strict history to wander into something a bit earthier, stranger, and far more fragrant, the curious, sometimes reckless, and unexpectedly creative world of medieval intoxication. Yes, people in the Middle Ages absolutely got high, but the how and why is where it gets truly fascinating. Before we really dive in, take a moment to hit like and subscribe button. Only if you truly enjoy this kind of offbeat historical storytelling, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It is always amazing to see how far this little circle of curiosity reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a small fan to add that soft hum in the background, and let's drift back through time together. It's easy to imagine medieval life as nothing but mud, plague carts, and stern-faced monks mumbling over musty parchment, yet beneath the heavy cloaks, candlelit halls, and eternal mud, people still craved escape. They were humans, first curious, bored, restless, and sometimes desperate enough to chew on something strange, just to see what might happen. After all, there was no electricity to brighten the nights, no coffee to kickstart the mornings, no modern painkillers to dull the aches of survival. Entertainment was either watching a tired jongleur attempt juggling, staring at the flickering fire, or, for the truly desperate, counting rats. So, when rumors spread of a root that could make you forget your backbreaking servitude or a mushroom that could grant visions beyond the horizon, well, most wouldn't think twice before taking a bite. It wasn't called getting high, of course. There were no jolly medieval stoner duos snickering behind haystacks. Instead, they cloaked it in words like divine inspiration, visionary ecstasy, pain relief, or, more ominously, communion with darker forces. Doctors prescribed herbs. Monks tended carefully labeled garden patches, herbalists offered tinctures with a nod and a warning, and witches, depending on who told the story, crafted ointments whispered over at midnight. Almost everyone, willingly or by accident, encountered these substances. Moldy bread could bring hallucinations, a harmless-looking flower could drag your mind into a labyrinth. Nature, for medieval people, was both healer and tempter, and she played rough. Let us start with what grew quietly in the medieval hedgerow. Plants whose leaves and roots whispered promises of sleep, visions, or something darker. Henbane was one such plant, soft furry leaves hiding potent alkaloids, strong enough to blur the hardest truths. A few crushed seeds in ale might calm the nerves before battle, or send drinkers stumbling into visions of talking shadows and impossible beasts. It wasn't a friendly high, too much, and the warmth of the fire twisted into crawling terror. Faces in the crowd stretched into ghoulish masks. Words tangled on the tongue like weeds in water. Then there was mandrake, the root shaped so human-like that stories claimed it screamed when pulled from the earth, a scream so terrible it could kill. Harvested carefully, often by tying it to a dog to do the fatal tug, it became a powerful sedative and hallucinogen, mixed into wine or chewed in slivers. Mandrake could plunge the anxious into heavy, dream-haunted sleep, yet the dreams were rarely gentle, twisting, feverish tapestries of memory, desire, and fear. In dark corners of Europe, mandrake wasn't medicine or recreation, it was a gate, sometimes to peace, sometimes to nightmares that lingered long after dawn. Belladonna, or beautiful lady, carried a more seductive danger. A few drops of its blackberry juice widened pupils, giving women a dreamy, liquid gaze that medieval poets adored. Yet the same berries could empty a heart of its rhythm in moments. Chewed for courage, dropped in wine for vision, or crushed into love potions whispered over by village witches. Belladonna blurred the line between healing and harm. But it wasn't only plants. Fungi, too, tempted the curious and desperate. Fly agaric, the white-capped, white-spotted mushroom familiar from fairy tales, was sometimes dried and swallowed, or steeped in milk to dull its raw toxicity. Those brave or foolish enough to taste it spoke of visions of spinning wheels of light, voices without mouths, and journeys where walls melted like wax. Yet the same mushroom could bring convulsions, violent sickness, or leave a mind forever clouded. And sometimes, intoxication wasn't chosen. Grain infected with ergot fungus turned morning bread into a doorway to fevered visions, burning skin, and madness. Entire villages dancing and howling under the full moon, unable to stop until death or exhaustion. To modernize, it might sound like reckless thrill-seeking, but in the medieval world, these plants and fungi were both medicine and mystery used by healers, monks and wanderers, seeking answers they couldn't find in prayer alone. And always, there was the gamble. Would you wake with eased pain and a softened mind, or not wake at all? These substances weren't locked away in dusty scholar-esque cabinets. They pulsed through the daily life of almost everyone, from field to fortress. Soldiers chewed bitter roots before battle, chasing courage in bitter sap when prayer alone wasn't enough. A sip of henbane-infused ale steadied shaking hands. A pull of mandrake tea dulled the dread of dawn charges and sharpened the illusion of invincibility. But the price always arrived later. Fevered nights under thin blankets, wounds left untended, while the mind wandered far from the barracks. In monasteries, monks tended careful rows of poppies and mandrake alongside rosemary and sage. They brewed tinctures not for pleasure, but for pain. The endless aches of age, the burn of infected wounds, the raw agony of dying pilgrims who collapsed at cloister doors. Yet even there, temptation lingered. An extra sip could turn chance into floating visions. The candlelit stone corridors could twist into tunnels of shimmering light. Most returned to their prayers, guilt heavy as the stone walls. Some sought those visions again in secret. Midwives and wise women kept hidden pouches of dried petals and crushed seeds. Medicine for birthing pains, restless infants, or nightmares that clung after sickness. To them, these plants weren't tea-devil's tools but gifts, ways to soothe what faith and warm cloth could not. Yet the same midwife might become a target, blamed for visions gone wrong, for deaths that came too swiftly after a cup of cloudy tea. Traveling peddlers carried more than needles and ribbons. In small, corked vials and paper-wrapped bundles lay dried mandrake chips, powdered henbane, or spiced wine thick with unknown roots. Some buyers sought relief from aching backs and sleepless nights. Others paid for visions they could boast of in taverns, glimpses of saints, whispers of futures, or simply a few hours when life felt lighter. And for the peddlers, profit was worth the risk, though each sale carried a silent prayer that the buyer wouldn't tea-drink too deep and never wake. Even peasants whose world rarely stretched beyond plowed fields knew these secrets. They gathered poppy heads to chew after harvest feasts. They crushed yarrow and belladonna into coarse ales to turn a freezing night softer. It wasn't pleasure they chased, but a thin shield against endless toil, hunger, and grief. To forget, even briefly, the weight of taxes, the bite of hunger, the churn of winter sickness. This was worth any gamble. From castle hall to roadside ditch, from cloistered cell to smoky tavern corner, the medieval mind reached for escape, not always for thrill or decadence, but for relief, courage, or a fleeting glimpse beyond the walls of mud and mortality. And always, there lurked a question no church could answer. When the world itself feels too heavy, what harm in drifting free for a night? So what did it feel like to step across that invisible line between sober hardship and drifting intoxication? For some, it began gently, a warm bloom behind the eyes, the hard edges of the world softening, breath growing deeper, thoughts unwinding like a coiled rope finally let loose. The smoke from a single candle would seem to dance with intention, each swirl carrying hidden messages only you could read. Sounds grew richer, thicker. The slow drip of water into a bucket became a song, the hum of night insects a secret choir. Walls appeared to breathe in time with your pulse. Shadows on stone twisted into shapes both familiar and strange. A flicker of torchlight could bloom into visions of golden cities, angels with wings aflame, or endless staircases climbing toward unseen heavens. For a peasant who'd known only the narrow paths between field and hearth, even a fleeting glimpse of that world felt worth any risk. Yet not all journeys were gentle. A sip too many, a dose too strong, and warmth turned to panic. The hearth's glow stretched into sneering mouths. The friendly dog by the door became a beast with gleaming fangs. Whispers in the mind could grow claws, voices accusing, pleading, or tempting toward acts unthinkable in sober dawn. Some stumbled into nightmares so vivid that waking offered no escape. The memory of terror clinging for days, souring food and shadowing laughter. Monks wrote of visions granted by God that dissolved into fevered ravings by morning. Midwives spoke of women who awoke from drugged sleep screaming at shapes only they could see. And healers kept quiet records of souls who never truly returned. Eyes open, hearts beating, but minds lost beyond reach. Yet for every tale of horror, there were whispers of something else. A widowed mother who, after tasting a tea of mandrake and sage, dreamed of her lost child's laughter and woke with tears, but also with strength to rise. A dying man who, in feverish visions, saw fields blooming and rivers shining, and whispered thanks before the final breath. A poet who claimed words came clearer after a swallow of honeyed wine spiced with belladonna, though the price was a night of shivering dread. The line between blessing and curse was thin as a poppy's petal. One mouthful too little, and pain gnawed on through the night. One mouthful too much, and the world could tilt forever. Yet still, they returned to these roots, brews, and powders, because in a life bound by toil, fear, and walls of dirt and stone, even a brief flight into visions felt like proof that something more existed, beyond fields, beyond plague, beyond death itself. In an age where church bells marked every dawn and dusk, the church stood watchful over body and soul, and nothing unsettled its guardians more than minds wandering where doctrine couldn't follow. Monks and priests wrote of the dangers of false visions, dreams not sent by saints but seeded by root, herb, or fungus. They warned that what seemed divine light could just as easily be a devil's trick, wrapping the mind in silk-thin delusion. Punishments could be harsh. A healer caught brewing poppy tea too strong might face penance, fines, or the lash. A peasant woman whose vision led to wild words in the marketplace could be locked away, declared possessed, or worse, accused of witchcraft. And yet, the lines were rarely clean. In cold monasteries, scriptorium lamps burned through the night, and sometimes so did small cups of herbal wine meant to ease contemplation. Some monks whispered prayers over mandrake root before long vigils, justifying the practice as a tool to glimpse heavenly truths. Records tell of visions carefully copied onto vellum, swirling wheels of fire, cities of crystal, and gold angels, too bright to gaze upon. Sights suspiciously similar to the stories told by villagers, who de-chewed the same bitter roots outside the cloister walls. The church officially condemned excess, but the same texts that warned against intoxication also left space for ecstasy, rapture, mystical union. A vision claimed in the name of God could grant a monk sainthood. The same vision, claimed by a poor woman, could see her dragged in chains before the bishop. Outside cloisters, control was harder. Markets still bustled with peddlers selling powders and teas. Midwives still steeped leaves for mothers writhing in childbirth, trusting pain as terror more than priests' words. Old women still taught granddaughters which roots dulled grief, which flower heads sharpened dreams. Every attempt to banish these plants and brews met the same truth. In a life marked by disease, hunger, and sudden death, people would risk damnation for a night peace, or a glimpse of something beyond stone walls and dying candles. Even priests sometimes turned quiet eyes away, knowing confession might reveal the same fear and longing they carried to, that perhaps God's voice did speak through poppy haze or fevered dream, or perhaps, at the edge of vision, waited only silence. And so, faith and fear walked side by side. People prayed at dawn, drank or chewed at dusk, and begged forgiveness by night. And the church, for all its power, could never fully tear root from earth, nor need from human hearts. In an age where church bells marked every dawn and dusk, the church stood watchful over body and soul, and nothing unsettled its guardians more than minds wandering where doctrine couldn't follow. Monks and priests wrote of the dangers of false visions, dreams not sent by saints but seeded by root, herb, or fungus. They warned that what seemed divine light could just as easily be a devil's trick, wrapping the mind in silk-thin delusion. Punishments could be harsh. A healer caught brewing poppy tea too strong might face penance, fines, or the lash. A peasant woman whose vision led to wild words in the marketplace could be locked away, declared possessed, or worse, accused of witchcraft. And yet, the lines were rarely clean. In cold monasteries, scriptorium lamps burned through the night, and sometimes so did small cups of herbal wine meant to ease contemplation. Some monks whispered prayers over mandrake root before long vigils, justifying the practice as a tool to glimpse heavenly truths. Records tell of visions carefully copied onto vellum, swirling wheels of fire, cities of crystal, and gold angels too bright to gaze upon. Sights suspiciously similar to the stories told by villagers who de-chewed the same bitter roots outside the cloister walls. The church officially condemned excess, but the same texts that warned against intoxication also left space for ecstasy, rapture, mystical union. A vision claimed in the name of God could grant a monk sainthood. The same vision, claimed by a poor woman, could see her dragged in chains before the bishop. Outside cloisters, control was harder. Markets still bustled with peddlers selling powders and teas. Midwives still steeped leaves for mothers writhing in childbirth, trusting pain as terror more than priests' words. Old women still taught granddaughters which roots dulled grief, which flowerheads sharpened dreams. Every attempt to banish these plants and brews met the same truth. In a life marked by disease, hunger, and sudden death, people would risk damnation for a night peace, or a glimpse of something beyond stone walls and dying candles. Even priests sometimes turned quiet eyes away, knowing confession might reveal the same fear and longing they carried to, that perhaps God's voice did speak through poppy haze or fevered dream, or perhaps, at the edge of vision, waited only silence. And so, faith and fear walked side by side. People prayed at dawn, drank or chewed at dusk, and begged forgiveness by night. And the church, for all its power, could never fully tear root from earth, nor need from human hearts. Imagine a twilight market, the air damp with mist rolling off riverbanks. Among stalls selling turnips, salted fish, and cracked pottery, a hunched woman lifts a cloth to reveal small bundles wrapped in waxed linen. Her voice barely rises above the clamor, for sleep that comes quick, for pain that keeps men from rest, for visions, if your heart dares. She doesn't name what lies inside. Crushed poppy heads, a pinch of dried henbane, a shaving of mandrake root. The words would bring trouble. The effect is known well enough. Coins slip into her palm. Warnings. 2. Only a sip. No more. She murmurs. Some listen. Some, weighed down by grief or hunger, do not. Beyond the town walls, in quiet huts under thatched roofs, midwives hang herbs from smoke-darkened beams. Yarrow for wounds. Mugwort for childbirth's terror. Belladonna hidden higher, away from curious hands. At night, when a mother labors with sweat-soaked brow, the midwife stirs a cup by lamplight, just enough to blunt the sharpest edge of pain. She prays softly as she stirs, though whether to saints or older spirits she no longer dares name aloud, even to herself. In monastery gardens walled from the world, novices move barefoot through dew-soaked grass, picking leaves before sunrise. They speak in coded whispers. Too much, and the tongue grows thick. Too little, and the pain keeps him awake. Their masters teach them to grind powders on smooth stone, to weigh doses by hand's memory, not written measure. Sometimes, the line blurs. An old monk, racked by coughing fits, asks for a stronger draught. The novice hesitates, then adds another pinch, voice shaking with fear and compassion. At taverns, after days of toil, men lift mugs heavy with ale, brewed stronger than laws allow. A handful of dried petals dropped in before serving, not for sweetness, but for that floating warmth that makes laughter easier, quarrels softer. Outside, frost gathers on windowsills. Inside, tongues loosen, hearts dare to remember joys and losses, too heavy to name sober. Yet risk breathes through every sip. A father wakes to find his eldest still, breath stilled by what should have been a gentle sleep. A wandering peddler, gaunt and coughing, sells a powder he barely understands, then vanishes into the next market road. A widow, desperate for one more dream of her lost child, takes too much and never rises from straw bedding. And still, the plants grow each spring. Still, people reach for them, driven by pain, by longing, by the old stubborn hope that somewhere beyond the everyday waits a vision, a relief, or at least a softer night. The church's shadow looms, but roots sink deep. Kings change, wars come and go, yet in secret pouches, hidden crocks, and night-whispered recipes, the knowledge survives. Mothers teach daughters, monks teach novices, traveling healers teach apprentices, not only which herbs to use, but when not to, and how to listen for that invisible boundary where help becomes harm. Picture the clearing beyond the last field. Summer night, moon hung low, drums carved from hollowed logs thumping a rhythm older than memory. It's harvest's end, the grain safely stored, the last sheaves tied with straw cords and charms against rot. Villagers gather around a fire that crackles and spits sparks into the dark. Mugs of ale pass from hand to hand, and someone produces a small clay pot. Thick, bitter liquid steeped with petals picked in secret corners of the wood. At first, laughter grows easier. Feet find the drum beat without thought. Faces glow in the shifting light, worries set aside with the setting sun. Then, slowly, eyes turn inward. A young man sways, seeing flames that dance into shapes only he can name. A woman smiles at a memory she cannot share. Some see nothing, only warmth and dizziness. Others glimpse visions, ancestors beckoning from shadows, strange animals whose eyes shine with human knowing. And when dawn peels night from the sky, not all remember what they saw, only that, for a heartbeat, the world felt wider than fields and mud. In townhouses, behind shuttered windows, nobles too sought what lay beyond sober thought. A lord's physician, grey-robed and cautious, measures powders onto wine, a pinch of poppy, a shaving of mandrake. The nobleman, restless with age, sips slowly, seeking calm for nights haunted by regrets. Taxes levied, lands burned, men sent to die in wars he barely remembers starting. By candlelight, tapestries seem to ripple, footsteps echo louder. For a moment he feels weightless, almost innocent. Queens and ladies, bound by duty and watchful courtiers, sometimes turned to these brews, not for visions, but for silence. Too quiet thoughts of children buried too soon, of marriages forged for crowns rather than love. A cup of rose-honeyed wine laced with crushed petals bought a night's sleep, free from whispered regrets. Even in stone castles, where banners snapped in cold wind, rumors flowed of kings who kept private gardens not only for herbs of healing, but for leaves that granted dreams richer than any tapestry. At feast's end, when jesters bowed and candles burned low, a trusted servant might bring a small silver dish, something to chew slowly, while the hall emptied. Not every king dared taste. Those who did often woke with words on their tongues they could not explain. Prophecies, prayers, or confessions best left unsaid. And beyond castle walls, in the dark arms of forests older than kingdoms, wanderers and wise folk still gathered leaves in dawn mist, crushing them with careful hands. They spoke softly of walking the hedge, a step between waking and dream, where answers waited in whispers only they could hear. Not always answers of glory, sometimes warnings, sometimes truths too heavy to bear. Yet still, the path called, and still, they walked it, because whether crowned or barefoot, cloaked in velvet or homespun wool, the pool was the same. A longing to see past the veil of daily hunger, war, and sorrow, to taste, even briefly, a world where iron laws of grief and loss bent or broke. In an age when faith wore armor and suspicion burned hotter than reason, the church's gaze turned harshest on what could not be fully seen. Visions, herbs, brews that opened minds to things no sermon controlled. Writs were signed, fires built high, and in village squares, flames licked at bundles of dried root and parchment filled with careful recipes. Women accused of witchcraft sometimes spoke only of teas they learned from grandmothers, a spoonful for fever, a pinch for dreams gentler than grief. Men who gathered herbs at dusk were called consorts of devils, their knowledge seen not as craft, but as pact. Yet even the hottest fire cannot burn memory. Songs whispered to soothe infants hid instructions in their verses, which flower to dry by moonlight, which root to keep for winter pains. Lullabies hummed in smoky kitchens carried words older than scripture, softened by rhyme so children would remember without understanding, until the day came to ask. In tapestries and embroidery, small symbols hid among lilies and lions, a twist of leaf meaning caution, a dark petal for sorrow, a curling vine hinting at secrets known only to those taught to see. A mother's hand moved needle over cloth, and with each stitch, past what could not be spoken, traveling storytellers carried more than news from distant towns. Their tales of wandering knights and dreaming maidens slipped secrets between verses, mentions of a herb that opens gates of silver light, a potion that cools anger, a mushroom red as a dragon esback that shows the past and future twined together. Those who listened closely heard more than adventure. They heard recipes, warnings, memories too dangerous to say aloud. Even within monastery walls, scribes copied herbal texts on vellum, writing in Latin thick with cautionary phrases. Yet in the margins bloomed small drawings, a leaf half-shaded, a root turned sideways, a flower petal traced in faded ink. To those who knew, these were signposts, quiet as breath, reminders that knowledge could bend but not break. And so, across centuries of fear and flame, the knowledge slipped forward, not unchanged, but alive, hidden in song, in thread, in story, in the hush before dawn when an old woman taught a child which plant to fear, which to trust. Because even when power declared forgetting sacred, human need whispered louder. The need to dull pain without gold, to find courage on nights when prayers felt hollow, to glimpse, if only for a breath, a world kinder than the one hammered by war and hunger. Centuries passed, kingdoms fell, new faiths rose, science marched forward with brass instruments and glass vials. Yet under all that progress, something older kept breathing, softly, stubbornly. What was once called witches, herb, became folk remedy. What monks steeped as elixirs of divine contemplation became tinctures for nerves. A tea once whispered to guide dreams reappeared in printed herbals as a cure for troubled sleep. The words changed, from Latin to local tongue, from secret rhyme to printed recipe, but the pulse beneath remained the same. In quiet farm kitchens, grandmothers measured dried petals by sight, not scale. They passed cups to mothers after birth, to men after funerals, to restless children on thunder-loud nights. They taught not just the name of each plant, but its story. Why you harvest at dawn. Why a prayer matters when you pull the root. Why too much of anything turns help to harm. In the hills, old families kept gardens bordered by hawthorn and yew, growing plants their ancestors knew by touch. They called them by gentle nicknames: good sleep, sweet shade, quiet courage, words safe enough to speak, yet carrying centuries of memory. Doctors rose and chemists bottled pills, yet still, people steeped chamomile before bed, burned sage in new homes, tucked lavender under pillows. Not always because it worked by measure, but because it felt like listening to something older than reason, a whisper of earth, rain, and patience. The red mushroom with white spots, once feared as devil-esque bread, became an image on postcards and fairy tale books, but its power lingered in quiet circles. Modern seekers, wearing denim instead of wool, still walk forests hoping to glimpse what medieval folk once saw, visions that speak not in words, but in color and hush. And so the chain stayed unbroken. Midwives became herbalists. Herbalists became folk healers. Stories passed from fireside to printed page, then to forums and screens, and everywhere, from garden walls to digital threads, the same question pulsed. Can something living, pulled from dark soil, still ease pain the world itself can't soothe? Even now in cities glowing with blue screens and neon signs, some hands still crumble dried leaves into teardrop petals into steaming water, or walk wild fields in search of a route whose name they barely remember, but whose promise feels older than doubt. Because despite centuries of fire, law, and forgetting, need proved stronger. So why does it linger? Why, in a world of tablets countered by barcode and diagnoses delivered through glowing screens, do we still ache for leaves that whisper, roots that hum with something deeper? Why do we pause when the wind carries the scent of dried herbs, or when an old song speaks of sleep, vision, or a walk between worlds? Because beneath the layers of science and steel, the ancient ache remains. The human longing not just to survive, but to feel, to know that there is more than dust and duty, that beyond the field's edge, or behind the eyes closed in pain, lies something else. A moment of peace, a door slightly ajar, a memory that doesn't quite belong to this world. Medieval folk reached for that door in the only ways they could, with roots pulled under moonlight, with brews stirred while prayers trembled on their lips, with courage greater than their fear of fire or damnation. And maybe, deep down, we're not so different. Maybe that's why some still walk forest paths alone, why some still keep a jar of petals in the cupboard, why a cup of tea feels like more than just warm water. It feels like connection, to a grandmother's hands, to a monk's ink-stained fingers, to someone long ago who also hurt, and dared to hope. This is not just history, it is inheritance, not of rituals to mimic or recipes to recreate, but of a question as old as breath. Is there more than this? And sometimes, if we listen, in the hush of night, in the steam rising from a simple cup, in the soft rustle of pages that smell like dust and time, we hear the answer not in thunder, not in law, but in a whisper. Yes, there is, and there always was.